Hello everyone, this is the Good Captain and welcome to my first tutorial video on the Midway Guadalcanal game system produced by Avalon Hill in the early 1990s. This is not the Midway or Guadalcanal from the 60s. Those are completely separate games with completely different rules, so I just want to clear that up right now. And for this first tutorial I've decided to cover the ins and outs of surface combat. And to do this I'm going to play through just one single turn very slowly and referencing the rules heavily of a battle scenario that is scenario 7J, the Battle of Cape Esperance. This is found in the Avalon Hill issue of the General, Volume 28, number 5. And I'm just using this as an example because it's fairly simple and straightforward and there's not a ton of ships or too many crazy special rules. So the way this is going to work, this first tutorial is just going to be playing through the first turn very slowly, and it's more or less to demonstrate the rules in action. And the second tutorial is going to be a playthrough of this battle. I'll be playing it start to finish at combat speed so that you can see the rules and the nuances in action, and we'll actually play through to the end. Before we get into the content, understand that the Midway Guadalcanal game system is primarily an operational level battle game. In other words, you're going to be using, playing on a map like this, a certain area of the globe, moving fleets and air units around on this map, and doing mostly air-to-air and air-to-surface combat. However, surface combats, when they do occur, are the most elaborate of those three types of combat, and a firm understanding of the rules is essential if you want to, the rules around surface combat are essential if you want to play this game, and certainly to play it well. So the first thing you want to do is understand the battle board. This is the battle board that comes out of box. This is where all air-to-air, air-to-surface, and surface-to-surface combats take place. And I'll just draw your attention to these yellow and black lines and black X's. These are relevant to surface combats in that you and your opponent will set up behind one or the other, depending on if it's a night battle or a day battle. And X is the spot where your lead ship will position itself. There's actually a good picture here in the manual under Rule 16C 2.4. And as you can see depicted here, we have a night fight between an American fleet, or an Allied fleet, I should say, and a Japanese fleet. And the lead ship is placed on the X, faced in one direction, and all the ships are placed behind it, facing the same direction. And the same is true for the Japanese. The exception to this, as you can see here on this picture, the Japanese have 3 more ships back here. This is only allowed, a second battle line is what it's called. You can set up a second battle line only if you have 6 or more ship units at the start of the surface combat. So for example, in the fight that we're about to go into here, the Battle of Cape Esperance, the Japanese only have 4 ships, so they have to place their lead ship on the night setup X there, right? Even though it's not highlighted here, it's kind of arbitrary. Anyway, we need 2 spaces between these 2 fleets, and we've got it here. So we're assuming Aoba is on the black X, and then all the ships follow her in line there. They cannot set up a second battle line because we don't have at least 6 ships. However, the Americans do have 6 ships, so they could, if they so desired, place a second battle line there. You can only do this if you have 3 ships to do it with. You couldn't have something like this. Notice even in the depiction there's at least 3 ships. You can never have a battle line start out with only 3 ships, or with only 2 ships. It has to be at least 3. So once you get the pieces out for the surface fight, as we've done here, you'll want to review the special rules. Here it'll give you victory conditions, and for this fight, the Japanese side wins it with 5 or more victory points than the Allied side, and the Allied side wins with 5 or more victory points than the Japanese side. Any other result is a tie game. Okay, pretty straightforward there. We're going to ignore this for the time being. We'll cover that in the playthrough video. It's about directions, the directions of the combatants and which hex they came from, affecting the actual surface fight. Attempts to break contact, we're going to skip over this for the purposes of this video. This doesn't happen until towards the middle end of the fight anyway. It's breaking ships off from the actual battle. This is important here, though. The Allied side holds the free roll marker at the game start. The night fighting modifier to the Japanese side's roll is -1. The free roll marker is given to one side or the other at the outset of any scenario, even operational scenarios, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You can use it to re-roll the results of any one battle. So if one side or the other felt like they got cheated in a dice roll, you can toss the free roll marker to your opponent and have them re-roll their dice and you re-roll yours. This is legitimate for any combat roll. It's and highlighted it here. Rolls for purposes other than combat are not allowed. So that's the free roll marker. The night fighting modifier to the Japanese side's roll being a -1, we'll get to that. Probably not in this video, but definitely in the next tutorial number 2. Okay, so we got our ships set up here, all ready to go, and the first thing to understand about surface combats is there's a turn sequence that you need to follow. It's located here under Rule 16D in your manual, and I've taken the liberty of bolding each sequence of the turn. The first sequence is to roll for combat sides. This is done to determine who is side A or side B for this particular turn. You'll do this at the top of every turn. So the high roller is side A and the low roller is side B. Let's do that now. I'll call out the dice just in case you can't see them. I always have the Japanese roll first. They roll a 6. The Americans will now roll, and they roll a 7. So the American forces, or the Allied fleet is surface side A for this turn. So we'll put the counter here, loaded up, and make sure it's faced side A surface turn. And for the Japanese, we're going to have it loaded up side B. Okay, and the first sequence is complete. We'll now move to the second sequence, which is surface movement. And surface side B moves their ships first, then surface side A. Movement on each of the counters is located in the bottom, or the movement factor, I should say, on each counter is located in the bottom right-hand corner of the counter. So if all the Allied ships here have a movement factor of 3, and incidentally, so do the Japanese, even though their ships are technically upside down, they're all 3. Okay. And during the movement phase, you can move up. Don't have to move. You can move 1 space, 2 space, or 3 spaces. In the case of all the ships in this battle, you can move basically no movement points or up to the maximum movement allotted on your counter. So Aoba could go 1, 2, 3. That's each hex costs 1 point. Kinugasa could do something like this: 1, 2, 3. So rotating, changing hex sides costs a point. Furutaka might just move 1. And this destroyer squadron might just turn around. 1, 2, 3. Now, clearly, I'm not trying to be tactical or do anything smart here. I just want to demonstrate movement. So very quickly, I'll just move the U.S. ships. And just to keep it simple, we're going to move ducks in a row. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Why not? And this guy will go 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and just stop. Okay, it doesn't really matter. Okay, moving on. The next phase is indicate torpedo fire. So any surface side B ships place torpedoes, and then surface side A will place torpedoes. We're not resolving combat. We're just, does anybody want to fire torpedoes? This is where things start to get really interesting. The torpedo factor of any vessel, if they have torpedoes, is second from the left on the bottom of the counter. Notice Boise and all the American cruisers have a dash. That means they do not carry torpedoes. However, the American destroyers, each squadron here has a torpedo factor, so they certainly do have torpedoes. When we look at the Japanese ships, we notice that every single one of their ships in this lineup has a torpedo factor. Whoops, that's this here. Okay, so all Japanese ships are able to fire torpedoes, and the American destroyer squadrons are able to fire torpedoes. And this is where how you can place your torpedoes. You're allowed to place torpedo markers as shown in the 4 possible directions. So there's a nice little diagram right below Rule 16 F2 in your manual that shows how this should look. So yes, torpedoes are denoted with their own counter. And you'll notice there's a number, with the IJN torpedoes it's 5, and with the US torpedoes it's 2. This is the quote-unquote range of the torpedoes, so including the hex in which they're deployed, they can only move this distance, right? So US torpedoes can start out in the hex that they were launched and move one more, and that's 2. Japanese torpedoes clearly can go much further. So in this case, surface side B, which is the Japanese, are allowed to declare their torpedo fires first. And we have to meet 2 criteria. There has to be a target and it has to be in range. And to claim a target, it has to be down one of those hex rows that was demonstrated in the illustration in the manual. So let's start with DD-16. We could shoot torpedoes out this direction, or we could shoot it out this direction, or we could shoot them out to the south of us here. Obviously, there's no targets to the south or to the northwest here, so yes, we'll aim at the San Francisco and let fly. So we just put the counter adjacent to the ship unit, and that's it for now. We could then do this for all these other boats, as long as they have targets in range and down the right hex row. So Kinugasa could, well, let me get the right torpedoes. Kinugasa would have a target, right? The Boise is down the right hex, within the hex row for torpedoes and in range, and Aoba could do this as well. The limiting factor here is that you can only fire torpedoes once per unit per surface combat, okay? And if you're American and you go back to the operational board, this is getting a little ahead of myself, but they can only fire once per game. However, Japanese ships carried reloads, so they can actually fire again in a future surface combat. But again, just the main takeaway here is once you fire torpedoes on either side in a surface combat, that ship is done firing. So you'll need to record that on a slip of paper or something to the side. Okay, now that side B has declared its torpedoes, side A will do so. In this case, the United States only has 1 destroyer squadron that's in range with a target. That's Aoba, so we'll just throw torpedoes back at them. And that's it for this phase. After we indicate torpedo fire, we go to Gunnery Combats, and this is where it pays to be side B, in my opinion. Resolve all surface side B gunnery attack combats first. So B is doing everything first, which is a negative if you're moving, but a positive if you're doing gunnery and torpedo combats. Gunnery combat is the heart and soul of a surface action. And we are going to start by demonstrating a shot from Aoba to the Destroyer Squadron number 9. The bottom left-hand corner of every ship unit contains what's called a surface factor. In the case of Aoba, this is denoted with a 2B, an alphanumeric. The number is the number that we get to add to our dice roll when we're shooting at any target. And the letter denotes basically the size and the power of the guns. That will come into effect in a moment. In the top right-hand corner is the defense factor of every ship unit. In the case of DD Squadron 9, this is a 2D. Again, an alphanumeric where the number is what the Allied side gets to add to its dice roll after it's been shot at by Aoba. And the D factor in this case is essentially a representation of the ship's armor, or endurance, or ability to take hits. So the Japanese are going to declare a shot, and we're going to check for any dice roll modifiers before rolling each side's dice. Conveniently, the battle board has all the modifiers necessary for use during surface combat printed right onto the board. So very quickly, we're just going to go through the top, from top to bottom. Torpedoes used at night gets a +2, making an anvil attack. Actually, we'll get into that much later. Don't worry about this one. Target ship is threading torpedoes. So those first 3 are dealing with torpedoes, which we're not interested in at the moment. Guns or torpedoes used at half range. Guns used in the front or rear sector. And then this is the where those letters come into effect. But we're not going to worry about this right now because it doesn't apply. Very soon I'll show you a case where it does. Also on the battle board printed here are the ranges for each type of gun. So A guns have a range of 6 hexes, B guns have a range of 5 hexes, and that is the type of gun that Aoba has while shooting at these American destroyers. Note that the half range for B-type guns is 2 hexes. Also note that guns or torpedoes used at half range get a +2 modifier. And in this situation, Aoba is 2 spaces away, so they will qualify for the +2. The Japanese player now rolls 1d10, and this is a 2. You can't see it in the screen. So we take our dice roll, add it to our surface factor, and add in the modifier for half range, and we end up with a modified 6. The Allied player now rolls its dice. The Allied player rolls a 4. The only modifier the Allied player has in any situation, or any situation where a ship is receiving fire, is the number in the top right-hand corner, in this case 2. So these American destroyers rolled a modified 6 as well. When you have an attacker, the attacker's number equals the defender's number, there is no damage. A tie goes to the defender. This is essentially a miss. Let's try shooting another one of the Japanese ships. Let's take Furutaka and fire at Helena. The modifier for the Japanese is a 2. The modifier for the Americans here is a 3. The Japanese have B-type guns, and the target is 3 hexes away. They will not qualify for the +2 half-hex bonus. The Japanese roll a dice. They roll a 4 and add in their surface factor for a modified dice roll of 6. The American player rolls a d10 for Helena and rolls a 10, which modifies to a 13. The defender has exceeded the attacker's number, and there is no damage. The heavy cruiser Kinugasa can still shoot, and she selects the Salt Lake City, the lead ship in the American squadron. It's basically the same setup. The Japanese player has a surface factor of 2. The American player has a defense factor of 3. There's no range bonus, so it's just a straight roll. The Japanese player will roll 1d10 and rolls a 10. So this is a modified 12 when we add in the surface factor. The American player will now roll. She rolls a 9, which is a modified 12. Okay, so once again, we've equaled, the numbers are equal, and so there's no damage. However, we're going to go ahead and assume that the Americans rolled an 8, so that the defensive number is less than the attacking number. And in this situation, Salt Lake City would be marked with a 1-hit counter. The effects of a 1-hit counter are that every number on the front of the ship unit is reduced by 1. So instead of having a surface factor of 3, it's been reduced to a 2. Its defense factor has been reduced from a 3 to a 2 as well for all future shots. We're going to do one more Gunnery Combat, and that's Destroyer Squadron 16. There's a reason for doing this. Note that Destroyer Squadron 16 has D-level guns. These are very weak guns. D guns have a range of 3 hexes, and their half range is 1. Salt Lake City is in range and has already taken a hit, so let's shoot at that. The Japanese will roll, However, in this situation, we need to take note that the Salt Lake City has 3B, and this is where the letter becomes important. Because the Japanese destroyer have D-level guns and it's shooting at a B armored target, we incur a -4 modifier. This is essentially representing the fact that the destroyer's guns are a little bit punier than the cruisers we've been shooting so far, and the armor of our target is stronger relative to those guns. So we have to add in this -4. No other modifiers apply, so the Japanese will roll 1d10. They roll a 2. They add in their surface factor. It runs up to a 3. And then they have to apply that -4 modifier, so we're back down to a -1. And so you might be wondering, what do you do when you have a negative modifier? And in the rule book, under Rule 4b3, this is one of the earlier rules that you might miss if you don't watch these videos and you read straight through the manual. I bolded this so I wouldn't miss it either. If the combat number is modified to less than 1, consider it to be a 1 for resolution purposes. Now, this means that in our attack, that we can ignore that negative modifier and just say we add 1 to our dice roll for a net of +3. But keep this in mind, not for this tutorial. If you stay with the series, there will be a situation in the future where the wording of this rule becomes very important. It has to be if the combat number is modified to less than 1. Okay, just it'll come up in an air battle situation where some defending air units have a 0 modifier, and so those will not be bumped up to a 1. But anyway, so normally the American player wouldn't even have to roll a die, but for purposes of this example, let's say the Japanese rolled an 8. That means that our modified roll would be a 9. So let's have the Americans roll a defense or a dice for to add to their surface factor. They roll a 9, which adding in their surface factor would be an 11 because the one hit has reduced their surface factor from a 3 to a 2. I misspoke earlier. The hit counters reduce everything on the front of the counter by 1 except movement. That's key. That's key. But in this situation, if the Japanese number had exceeded the American number, we would add a second hit. The damage would reduce the front of the counter, the numbers on the front of the counter by 2, except for movement. If later in the battle the Salt Lake City took a third hit, the hit counter would be completely removed and the ship would be flipped to its opposite side. For purposes of this video, we're going to say that the American ships have shot. I'm not going to do all the combats. We'll say Gunnery Combat is complete. We then move to the next phase of a surface turn, which is Torpedo Combat. And I'm just going to resolve 1 because there really isn't that many modifiers when dealing with torpedoes like there are with when you're dealing with gunnery. And we're going to do the Japanese strike against the American destroyer squadron. We're going to say that the Americans landed 2 hits on Aoba in the on their side of the gunnery from any number of these ships here. Okay, so before we get to the torpedo phase, she's taken 2 hits, and this will affect our effectiveness when the torpedoes actually hit DD Squadron 9 here. So let's check our surface modifiers, because many of them do affect torpedo combat. And right off the bat, we see +2 for torpedoes used at night. And this is a night scenario, so we're automatically going to qualify for that bonus. These other 2 don't really apply, or don't apply. We'll get to that in the next tutorial. And then, do we qualify for torpedoes used at half range? Checking the range chart, yes, we do. The target is 2 hexes away, and Japanese qualify for half range. So we have a net modifier of +4 from all that, and our torpedo factor is 2. However, because of these 2 hits, it's been reduced to a 0. So we're just left with the net +4. The Japanese will roll the dice, and they roll a 2. +4 makes a 6. Sorry, I forgot to track the torpedoes. You should always move the torpedo counter. In the first hex entered, the one that was deployed in counts as number 1, and then it moves number 2. Okay. So the Japanese roll a 2, have a modified 6, and the American defense factor is a 2. This is where armor doesn't apply. It's just a flat roll. There's no modifier for torpedoes when engaging any types of ships there. So the American player rolls the dice, and there is no effect. But that doesn't mean the torpedoes missed. The rules state to continue to track the torpedoes until they run out of movement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they're removed from the board. Why is that? Well, it's considered that no targets were hit, but that other ships behind those targets could be hit if there was no effect on the primary or first target. It's kind of one of the little neat nuanced rules in regards to torpedoes. For purposes of this tutorial video, we're going to say that all torpedo combats are now complete. We would then go to break-offs, which we are not going to cover in this video, and then the final phase is to end turn. This is accomplished simply by moving the turn counters forward to surface turn 2, and then you'll repeat the entire sequence, starting with rolling for combat sides. So just because the Japanese were side B on the first round doesn't mean they're going to be side B on the second. Thanks for watching this. I hope this was clear and helpful in explaining how surface combats work in this game system. If you'd like to learn and or see more about how surface combats work, check out tutorial number 2, where we actually will play out the entire battle of Cape Esperance. Thanks again for watching this. All the best from the good captain, and bye-bye.